Everybody. This is our first time together for this course, so I'm just really happy to be here and to be able to be your instructor for this course this semester. I hope you all had a really nice holiday break, and I'm sure it was very well deserved, and you hopefully feel rejuvenated over that break so that you are ready to hit the semester and hit the ground running. I'm really excited to be your instructor. I wish so much that I could meet you all in person, but we're going to have to just kind of do it this way online, but I will have some office hours available. So I hope that you will pop in, and I'll be posting my Zoom room so that you can pop into that on Monday afternoons if you have any questions or you just want to chat. And then, of course, we'll use the discussion board to introduce yourselves and let me know a little bit about you. I'm really curious about your experience and what you hope to get out of this course and where you are currently doing your student teaching, or maybe you're already employed as a teacher. And I would love to know all of those things as well. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly and kind of just do a quick little overview of the homepage of the Canvas course. And then I'm just going to do a little introduction to this course, and then you'll be hearing from me every week. So I'll do a little introductory kind of video lecture. I don't want to make it too long because I know it's difficult to watch something that is so lengthy. So I'll try to be mindful of that. And all right, so let's get started. Let me share my screen and kind of show you how this is set up. And I tried to make the Canvas course super simple, so hopefully it'll be really easy to find things. Right here is the Start Here button. And then all of the modules are listed in order of week, so it should be very simple to kind of find what week we are in. I'll make sure that everything is published and available the Sunday before the week starts, and then you'll have all of the assignments that need to be turned in by the following Sunday night, right before midnight. So I just wanted to point out one thing where the syllabus is. It's pretty straightforward. Please let me know if you have questions on the syllabus. Otherwise, I think it'll look pretty familiar to you from other courses that you've had. And then this one kind of fun little section, what sparks you joy. And I would love it if you guys would kind of visit this section. I just put some fun pictures that I thought would be great to share with you guys. Some things about my background, things that I really love. I love the outdoors. You'll see a lot of photos there and just things that are kind of near and dear to my heart. So I wanted to kind of share that with you, and hopefully you will be able to do that as well. You can just simply add your name, upload a photo, and then a little description if you'd like. And this might be kind of a fun place to just post things that you love or things that are exciting in your life that you want to share. So that's on the home page. Let me go back for a second. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop sharing really quick, and then I'm going to share some slides with you, and I'll make sure that these slides are uploaded. We're not going to go through the whole slide pack for this first introductory video. I'm just going to do part of it, but I kind of want to just give you a little overview of transition in general, and I also want to share some things about myself. So that's where we're going to start today. Let me get this going. Here we go. Okay, great. All right. So what is transition all about? So really, we're talking mostly about preparing students for a meaningful life. There's so much we do as special education teachers, of course, but transition is really focused on getting students and their families prepared for a meaningful life after high school, whatever that might be. And that is really individualized to the student and can look very different depending on all kinds of things, what the student preferences are and their values and their family and their location and their abilities, all of those things. So we'll be talking about that in more depth throughout this whole course. But first, I wanted to just introduce myself. I mentioned again that my name is Lavinia Grippentrog. I know it's kind of a mouthful. I actually, my first name came from my great grandmother who was English. And as a child, I really struggled with my first name because everybody either mispronounced it or misspelled it. And now I love it as an adult because I don't get confused with anyone else. So feel free to call me Lavinia. We don't have to be formal during this class. But I want to talk a little bit about, kind of how I landed in this career. So I began working with adults with disabilities, gosh, over 30 years ago when I first moved to Park City in my 20s. And I came out to Park City from Massachusetts really just to be, um, because of the love of skiing I had. And my main goal was to be a ski instructor for 1 year. And then I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do after that. But prior to the ski season, I started working for an adult provider and I was supporting adults with disabilities in the community and also at home in their supported living apartments. And I just absolutely fell in love with this population. I had never had exposure really to individuals with disabilities, growing up or even in my undergrad. And when I started working and supporting these adults in Park City in a supervised apartment program, I absolutely knew from that moment on that I had found my population. So, working as a direct support person in that program was a wonderful experience, but it really didn't pay the bills. At one point, I had 3 jobs just to kind of, to make ends meet. So then I decided to go back to school to get a master's degree in special education and a teaching certification at the University of Utah. So I did that, and then I taught for about 22 years in 3 different districts throughout Utah. And I taught everything from kindergarten to age 22. So I've got experience in middle school, high school, kind of all of those, the whole lifespan, right? And the last 12 years in particular, I was in Murray School District and I taught post high, and that is students 18 to 22 in a community-based post-high program. And I just absolutely fell in love with transition. This idea of getting students ready for the rest of their life and really having them be independent in the community and in employment was just so exciting for me. So partway through my teaching, I went back for a second master's degree at Utah State University in transition. So there was a transition specialist master's program. And so I did that. And then after that, I really felt like, gosh, with all this kind of knowledge I have now, I want to have a different impact. I want to work with adults and I want to support teachers. I always loved mentoring student teachers in my career. So I saw an opportunity at the State Board of Education as a transition specialist, and I got that position in 2017, and I have never looked back. So here I am, almost 8 years at the State Board of Education. And so now I get to support special ed directors and special education teachers and teacher specialists all over the state. I travel around the state often. I do a lot of conferences, do a lot of kind of state projects, and I'll be sharing some of those with you. So I definitely miss students, but I still love what I do and feel like I can have an impact kind of across the state. So that's a little about me when I am not working. You can see by the photos, I absolutely adore being outside. So skiing is a huge passion of mine, and mountain biking. That bottom picture, you can kind of see there's a little person on a bike. That's me mountain biking. I love to do that. And then, spending time with my husband and my kids, although my kids are adults now and they're out of the house. My daughter is a teacher. She's a science teacher, chemistry in California. And my son is an environmental science major at the University of Utah. So my daughter's 26 and my son will be 23 in a couple of months. So yes, I love my life here in Park City, and when I'm not working, I'm out playing. So got to find that balance, right? And hopefully you all have that balance as well. So more importantly, that's just some background about me, but I really, really want to learn more about you all. So in that discussion board assignment that we have for this week, you are welcome to do a video if you don't want to type. That's absolutely fine. I would love that. But you're also welcome to just chime in and type and then think about some of these questions. You can share whatever you would like with me, But I would really like to know, where are you currently doing your student teaching, or maybe you are actually employed as a special education teacher. I'd love to know where that is, what grades you teach, what age, what questions you have for me, certainly. And then, of course, what brings you joy and anything else you would love to share with me. So that's for the discussion board. And then again, I just want to make sure it's really clear that, why are we here? Why is transition so important? And why are you having to take this entire semester course focused on transition? And really to ensure that you as a special educator understand and you can implement not only compliant transition plans, but quality plans for students with disabilities to help really facilitate a student's meaningful post-school outcomes in employment, education, and independent living. So as we dive into kind of what's in the transition plan, which is embedded in all students' IEP starting at age 14, everything is really focused on this idea of how do we get students ready for these three things: employment, further education and training, and independent living. So we're going to be talking about that a lot. So just kind of quickly, the learning intentions and the success criteria for this course really will be to have a deep understanding um, of the purpose of a quality transition planning process to improve those post-school outcomes. I'm going to share with you kind of how are our students doing when they leave our schools in Utah, and how do we make that, better for our students with disabilities. I want everyone, when they walk away from this course, to be able to feel really confident in writing not only a compliant transition plan, but a quality one. So compliance is kind of setting the bar low. It's kind of the very minimum that has to be correct in a transition plan embedded in that IEP. But it's really more about quality, and it's really more about the process than just filling out the forms correctly. And then last, but certainly not least, we're going to talk a lot about this idea of collaboration. So post-secondary transition is not a solo event. I know when I first started working in this area of transition, I thought, gosh, I have to do it all. I have to find the students jobs. I have to, connect them to outside agencies. Like I have to do everything by myself. And really it's a collaborative event. So you really kind of want to make sure that you are working with a team, whether that be outside agency representatives, families, parents, certainly other educators in your building. If you're not a natural collaborator, that might be kind of a challenge, but I think we'll provide you with some great strategies and ways that you can collaborate. I know when I first started collaborating with outside agencies, I felt really uncomfortable because I didn't really know what questions to ask. I didn't really know what to expect from those folks, or what I should be, doing in my own role. So collaboration can be kind of uncomfortable and messy. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it is so vitally important for a quality transition experience, I think, for our students with disabilities when they leave our schools and kind of go into this adult world. So that will be a big theme. I just want to pose this question. I love to start with this. So I'm going to be using kind of the terms transition and post-secondary transition interchangeably. At the State Board of Education, we have now been told that we must use the term post-secondary transition just because transition has other meanings, and we don't want to confuse the word transition to mean something other than transition for students with disabilities. So again, I'll use those words kind of interchangeably. But this idea, it's just a couple of words, right? But what are we talking about when we're talking about post-secondary transition? And there's a lot of moving parts, and that's why we have this whole semester course. But I want you to think for a minute, like when you hear transition or post-secondary transition, like what pops into your mind? What concepts? What actions? What maybe think about your own experience when you were a young adult in high school. Like, what did that look like? How did you help get yourself prepared? Or what did maybe some family members do or teachers do to help you be successful when you left high school, right? Because I think we all know that the settings are so different when we leave high school. Everything's different. College, employment, just adulting in general. And I think it's important to realize that, gosh, not only with students with disabilities, can really benefit from kind of this robust support around transition, but all students can. But of course, only students with disabilities have this legal document we call the IEP, and then have that transition plan embedded in it. So hopefully you thought for a minute. If you want to pause the video, great, jot some things down. But I'm curious as to what popped into your mind and how that might relate to the list that I have here. So post-secondary transition it involves teaching self-determination and self-advocacy skills. I used to have this last on this list, but I have bumped it to the top because it is so important, especially with students with disabilities. We often do so much for them, and that we forget that we really need to encourage and teach and value this idea of students advocating for themselves and being self-determined, understanding their disability, knowing their accommodations, this whole concept. And we're going to spend a lot of time diving into that. But think about that. And then this is kind of right out of the language of the law, but this whole idea of transition, and especially when a student is young, it's going through this process of self-discovery. So it's helping the student discover their own strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. And of course, you as the teacher really need to know your students' strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. And that just doesn't mean academic strengths, but strengths, how it can relate to employment, independent living, and further education and training. So we're going to revisit this idea of strengths, preference, interests, and needs a lot during this semester. And we like the acronym SPINS. So I'm going to refer to SPINS a whole lot. And you'll see how that kind of makes sense as we go through all the parts of transition. And then, what else is transition? It's really putting together a plan for a meaningful life after high school, really making sure that's individualized to the student, and that it includes, all of the things that are meaningful for that student, and how do we help them have the experiences and the skills to successfully transition to those post-school settings. We can't discount that transition can be scary. It's a change for not only for students, but for families. I worked, with families for many years, and many parents are super afraid of school, being no longer there for their student. So, keep that in mind, that change can be scary, and that it really involves not just the students, but definitely the families and parents specifically. Transition is also making sure that we start this idea of career exploration. How do students learn about careers? How do they know what their strengths, interests, preferences are, and how those directly connect and relate to potential career options for them? So a lot of exploration, a lot of exposure to work is really part of transition too. And we'll talk more about what that might look like. And of course, adult living skills. A lot of times we think, oh, it's only those students with more complex needs that really need these, adult living skills, but that's not true. We have a lot of students that have maybe just, specific learning disabilities, but they lack those adult living skills. They can't navigate around the community. They don't know how to call and make a doctor's appointment, pick up their medication, sort of all of those adult things. So we want to assess for those, and we want to plan for those and teach skills around that as well. And then instruction and experiences that support the students' post-school goals. So, we write lots of goals on IEPs and on transition plans, and we write these, lovely goals for what they're going to do after school. But we really have to break it down and say, okay, now what do we have to teach the student? What experiences do they have to have so that they can go out there and actually live that goal, right? Like actually reach that goal. So we'll be talking a lot about what these instruction and experiences, could or should look like. And then again, that theme of collaboration. It's really our job as a special educator to make sure that we not only know about outside agencies and connect with them, but really to help connect those families and students so that they feel like they have that seamless transition. It's very daunting to navigate the adult agency world alone as a student, and even parents. It can be a difficult process. So, it's really important that schools help facilitate that connection. All right. So I want you to think about this for a minute, and maybe you have your own experience of working with students. Maybe you have family members that have disabilities, and what are they doing after they leave high school? I think especially students with more complex needs, like we know that many students after they leave school aren't doing a whole lot. They're not working, they're not pursuing more education, they're not really active members of the community. So I really want to, think about sort of this idea of beginning with the end in mind and making sure that we are preparing our students for that, meaningful life. And what is a meaningful life? And we'll get into that in a minute. But I think especially we want to make sure that employment is the expectation and not the exception, especially if you're working with students with complex needs. I think sometimes we just think, oh, they can't work. And I come from the frame of mind that even if the student has a lot of barriers to employment and a lot of challenges, we just have to figure it out. And it might take a while, but I think all students could work. And it might look different and it's very individualized, but we need to have high expectations around this idea of employment. The student has the rest of their life to live. And when school is over, most of us find a lot of joy out of our employment. And that's, not only do we get money from that, but it's connection, it's friendship, it's self-esteem, it's all of those things. So we always want to, when we're kind of thinking of the context of transition, it's beginning with the end in mind. So really thinking about like, how do we make that student's life meaningful when they leave? Even if they're now just in ninth grade, it's hard to think that far ahead, but I think that's where we need to think about and also try to bring parents along in that process as well. So just some data around, I don't want to bore you with a lot of data, but you may not be aware of this, but we are accountable in our state, and every single school district and charter school is accountable for what students are doing after they leave school a year after. So what I mean by that is it's called the Post-School Outcomes Survey. We actually try to call every single former student a year after they've graduated or aged out or left a school in Utah. And we ask them a whole bunch of questions and we survey them and their parents to say, have the schools done a good job? Like, is your student involved in employment? And again, the big three, we look at employment, further education and training, and independent living. So we do these phone calls in the summer and we ask students and families, what level of employment is your student engaged in? Are they going to college or doing some other training? And are they living at home or are they connected with outside agencies? So we gather all this information and then we have to actually report this to the federal government, to the Office of Special Education Programs at the Department of Education. So this is a big deal. So I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of how are our students in Utah doing when they leave our schools? Well, I'll give you some current data. So we did a survey this past summer, and those data are just about to get reported in a month. And we actually, unfortunately, kind of decreased a little bit in some of our outcomes, which is unfortunate, but I'll share these with you and try to make sense of them. So only 18% of those former students that had IEPs in high school a year later are actually enrolled in a 2 or 4 year college. So it's a pretty small percentage. I'd say historically that's been about 20%. So we saw a dip there. And then only 58%, and these are all students that had an IEP in high school. We called a year later, it's about 5,000 students. Only 58% of those are competitively employed. And what I mean by that is they have to be working in the community at least 20 hours a week, about 90 days throughout the year, at least is kind of the criteria, and they have to be earning minimum wage or higher. So that's, under 60% of our students are meeting that criteria. And then 23% are engaged in some other education or training. So what that means is maybe they're not at a 2 or 4 year college, but maybe they're doing an apprenticeship, or maybe they are doing like a certification, like a nursing assistant, for example, or a welding certification. So 23% of our exiters are doing that. And then 14% are engaged in some other kind of employment. So that might be a family business, that could be employment that isn't maybe 20 hours a week, but they're working 10 hours a week. So that's 14% of our students. And then 16% of our students aren't meeting the criteria at all. So that means 16% of those students are not doing any further education, training, or employment. So they're, possibly sitting in their parents' basements playing video games. I don't know. But we want all of our students engaged in something meaningful. So just a little snapshot of kind of how our former students are doing. And this is really the whole idea behind transition and services and trying to get our students better prepared so that they have those better outcomes. So I pulled data specifically for students with autism just to give you kind of a comparison. So the slide before was all students that had an IEP in place a year after high school. That's what they were engaged in. Now, these are students that had the disability category of autism. And only 46% of students with autism had worked for at least 3 months. So some of those may have been in school, but 35% were not employed at all. And they said that was due to health or disability related issues. Well, in some cases, I think those disability related issues means that maybe they lacked the skills or the experience, or maybe they didn't get support from an outside agency. So in my mind, that 35% probably could have been mitigated with the right supports and the right skills. And then 26% of students, former students with autism, were not engaged at all in any form of employment or education and training. And I do want to say in Utah, if a student goes on a humanitarian or church mission, that does count as further education and training. So just want to point that out. So we do capture those data, but 26% of students with autism were not engaged in any of these things. So that means, over a quarter of our students with autism were not receiving further education and training or employment. So that's, we have work to do. I just want to contrast that with the study that was done in 2015, where they found that 90% of youth with autism who had a job during high school also had that job in their early 20s, compared to only 40% of those who did not work during high school. So the takeaway here, I mean, the numbers don't, maybe matter so much in terms of you remembering them, but the takeaway here is that if students have jobs while they're in high school, that expectation of work, they are much more likely to have those jobs after high school. If we don't really stress paid employment during high school, then they're much less likely to have it after high school. So we can't just say, oh, we'll just wait, when the student's older, we'll worry about work later. We really have to emphasize this idea of work experience while students are in high school. So that's just something I really wanted to point out, because it's a very strong evidence and research-based predictor of how students will do when they leave, if they actually have employment during high school. So think about that. So yeah, I just want to kind of, if you want to pause the video or talk about this at all in your discussion, that's fine too. There's no assignment connected with this, but just wondering what your thoughts are. Like, did you know about some of those outcomes? Was that a total surprise to you? In my opinion, we have work to do, right? We need to do a better job, I think, preparing our students with disabilities. And that's the whole reason why in transition and this whole idea of emphasizing transition and making sure that we are providing quality transition services to students while they're in school is so, so important. I know the academics are important, graduating, all of that, but we can't discount all of these other transition related services and skills. And we'll talk about what those look like. All right, so this idea of a meaningful life. Think about for a minute what gives your life significance, value, and purpose. I talked a little bit about how important, how, most of us work, right? And that's kind of what gets you out of bed in the morning, and you're earning money, you have social connection, you have value, you're growing. All of those things are so important, but there's other things besides work. So think about that for a second, and then I'll kind of provide a list here and see if this resonates with you, right? So employment being on the top, but engagement, community, and friends, super important, right? So if students are isolated at home, they're not engaged in their communities, or able to see friends after they graduate. If it's all connected to school, how do we help students connect to things in the community and making new friends? And then, of course, having a happy home, hopefully like home life, that's part of this idea of a meaningful life. You may have children that are, very meaningful to you in your life, and of course, your health. So we have to think of transition also in the context of healthy lifestyles for our students with disabilities, right? And that, I think, means both physical and mental health. And then we all, in most cases, have lots of choices and options, but sometimes students with disabilities are not given those choices and options. But that adds to our quality of life. So we really want to think about a student with a, complex need should also have choices and options, and freedom and independence, and that feeling of being a valued member of a community, of society, of a part of something. So again, I think as we develop transition plans for students and really look at experiences and skills, we have to keep this whole list in mind, right? What are we talking about when we're talking about a successful, meaningful life? It's not just that diploma. It's not just the fact that they left school, right? It's more than that. So preparing those students. And then I think this is worth talking about a little bit. I think we have for years and still do oftentimes set low expectations for students with disabilities, especially our students with more complex needs. So I think we have to be careful not to just kind of set low expectations, but really to set those high expectations. And it's really not so much what the skills are that the student brings to the table, but how do we set the table? So how do we talk about these opportunities that students can try, instead of looking at their deficits and saying, oh, they can't do that, that idea or that opportunity is not on the table. So think about that. And especially, I think as a special educator, you have a lot more power, I think, than maybe you think you do. So what I mean by that is that parents will often look to you as professionals for what's possible, right? So I think if you have high expectations of your students, I think parents will respond to that. So student outcomes are heavily influenced by family expectations. So some families have very high expectations of their own students, right? Like you will go to college. There's no question about that. But I think sometimes families might look to us for expectations for their child with a disability. And if we set those high, I think that can really impact the family's expectations. So we know from research that family expectations are influenced by professional guidance. That's you all, and knowledge and expectations. So think about that, when you're sitting around the table at an IEP meeting or having conversations with parents, it's your beliefs and expectations have greater impact on a student going to college than the student's skills. So, are we talking about these things with our students that have complex needs? A student with Down syndrome can go to college now. That was not the case maybe 20, 30 years ago, but there are programs now for that. So not a lot of parents know that, or they're fearful, or they don't know what that might look like. And so again, always have high expectations. And I think talk about those and share those with parents. And I think that gives them some confidence, because parents oftentimes are, I think told a lot through the process that their child has deficits, right? And we kind of want to flip that around when it comes to this idea of transition. We want to have high expectations and not just be focused on deficits. We really want to flip that and think about the student's spins, strengths, interests, preferences, and needs. All right. Couple more slides and I'm going to end for this week. But so how do we improve those outcomes, right? So we know that our outcomes for our students with disabilities aren't great, and we need to improve that. Well, definitely this idea of understanding the importance of transitions, starting early, developing quality plans, individualized plans for students is really, really important. And all of that kind of starts with the law. And you're going to be reading that article that really talks about the difference in how the law has evolved. It used to not our laws around IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, did not include transition initially. And then it did. They started to put language in around this idea of making sure that there was a transition plan. And then in 2004, they strengthened that language and said it's not just a process of going through filling out a form and making a plan. It's really outcome oriented. So we're not just writing these things down and then not doing anything. We really have to ensure that the transition plan is implemented so that we have better outcomes for students. So just really briefly, we're going to go into more depth around this, but just to be clear, a transition plan must be developed for a student with an IEP beginning at age 14 or earlier if appropriate. So this is our rules here in Utah. We begin transition plans when the student is 14, or sometimes schools will start that earlier, and that's kind of an LEA-based decision, a local education agency or district or charter school decision, or it's an IEP team decision to start that plan earlier. But in terms of compliance, it has to be starting at age 14. So you may have read or heard the age 16. Well, that is the federal age. So IDEA federal law says that a student at age 16 must have a transition plan. Many, many states have gone above and beyond that and have started transition planning earlier. Utah did this as well in 2016. Some states are even starting at age 12. We're not quite there yet. So I just want to make that super clear. Student must be invited to the IEP where transition services will be discussed, and we'll go into depth about not only just should the student be invited, but they should be like an active participant of that meeting. Transition assessments must be conducted prior to the transition IEP meeting, and we're going to have a whole section on transition assessment, so I won't go there, but it really is the foundation of a transition plan. So we have to start with that. And there's those spins again. Transition goals and services must be based on a student's strengths, interests, preferences, and needs. So I think I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to talk about the predictors right now. We'll kind of dive into that later. So I'm going to stop the recording. Please reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will be seeing you next week. Thank you, everybody.